Alright, the dust has settled, the game is done. It's time for my thoughts on Hollow Knight Silksong, and how this is a very challenging and going to be very polarizing sequel to the first game. And we're going to try and figure out whether or not it is better or worse than Hollow Knight. To keep things simple, we'll be doing both the non-spoiler and spoiler parts of this review, and I'll give you ample warning when we switch over to it. Silksong begins some point after the first game, where our antagonist slash friend slash rival Hornet has been kidnapped by a mysterious group and has been taken to yet another bug-filled land with, guess what? A curse that's corrupting everyone, and we are going to have to jump and stab and of course die a whole lot in order to get to the bottom of this mystery. It feels like Team Cherry set out with a mission to reinvent all the major aspects of playing Hollow Knight in subtle or not so subtle ways. Your air dash, which used to be just a straight horizontal push when you do it in the air, now quickly degrades, so you kind of go straight and then you just immediately start going down. This will of course affect the timing when you're trying to make very precise jumps into certain walls. Speaking about timing, the now famous pogo bounce maneuver. At its base kit in Silksong, it's now done at a diagonal. No longer do you just press down and attack when you're over an enemy. So this creates yet another bit of challenge when you're trying to kind of map out in your head where you need to be in the air in order to land a pogo. Now, that can be solved with a new system that I'll come back to in a minute. You do get access to an actual dash on the ground, but it's not one that you can immediately move. When you hit the dash button, you kind of go into like a quick, a stutter step before you start being able to control your character. So it's very easy to accidentally launch yourself off a platform if you're not careful. Another part that has seen some change is how the trinket slash kind of like artifact system worked from Hollow Knight. Before, you had to equip different items, and they each had an associated cost to them. Now, all your trinkets, or now they're redefined as tools, belong to one of three categories, and you'll be able to equip them based on the number of available slots. So one tool set is kind of your special attacks, another one are passive benefits, and one is kind of like quality of life or alterations onto Hornet. And I will say, I think I like the system a bit more. It definitely plays, I think, with one of the more interesting aspects of Silksong, and that is letting the player create an actual factual build for how you want to play it. You definitely had that in Hollow Knight with the different trinkets, but because of the associated costs with it, it meant that it was very hard to actually get a build going. Not to mention the annoyance having to swap between different trinkets when the need comes up. And this goes with another aspect, and that is the use of crests. As you explore the world, you'll pick up various crests, and essentially they are different classes that you can spec Hornet into. The crests affect your different attacks, as well as the different allotment of tools. So a more aggressive crest will let you equip more offensive tools. Another one may give you more passive tool slots. And it's a very interesting take, because the crests themselves do not change your actual attributes. A crest doesn't give you more health, doesn't give you more or less damage. Those again are going to be based on the upgrades that you find in the world. Once I got the crest that lets you basically play the game like Hollow Knight, that was it. I was off to the races in Silksong. I was not swapping that. And it's a great idea that I think I would like to see maybe develop a little bit more. Because again, it does feel like you're just getting very slight variations. Like there are some that are just incredibly polarized in terms of their use. I think it was either Shaman or Witch that basically lets you now play as a range attack. And I'm sure there's going to be people theory crafting and of course doing speedruns with specific crests as the months go on. Our level design continues to be amazing slash confusing slash massive. The world is definitely larger compared to Hollow Knight, and there are far more secrets in this one. Like with the first game, this is one of those titles where that one wall that looks slightly off, or that one ceiling patch that doesn't match anything else in the room, could lead you into a secret, or a secret within a secret, to another area, to another secret area, with probably a super difficult optional boss waiting to punch you in the face. And punch you in the face this game will. As another aspect of Silksong is definitely increasing the difficulty curve, both in terms of platforming and the enemy designs. In a way, Silksong feels like it was designed to essentially be for someone who has at least beat the original Hollow Knight. Not even true ending, just simply get through it. And from what I heard from interviews, that this was originally pitched as DLC for the base game, I think kind of confirms those theories. Very early in the Silksong, enemies will start doing at least 2 points of health damage per hit. A lot of environmental hazards will do that as well. A new, I guess, quote-unquote, lovely trick that enemies will do is that they'll hit you, and yes, the original hit will only do 1 point of damage, but it's actually a combo, so they'll stun lock you and get another point of health in. Now, as a means of easing the pain of this, healing has been adjusted. It's no longer hold the button down, you slowly heal 1 pip at a time. When you do a heal, you'll recover at minimum 3 points of health at a time, and there's ways of course, enhancing that further. And this goes with, I think, a greater or a more beneficial change of Silksong, that combat feels a lot snappier to go with it. Since you can now heal in the air, there is a greater emphasis again on movement and control during combat. In the first game, the most you had to do for a lot of common enemies was just pogo bounce until dead. Here you'll need to make use of your evade, your kind of running attack to kind of cover ground, and of course the various tools to give yourself an edge, as there are far more arenas and far more nastier arenas to go through in Silksong. And as I say that, I'm sure everyone who's played the game knows exactly which one I'm thinking of as I'm describing it. Boss designs still remain to be on the challenging side. You will of course be fighting multi-pattern fights, and again with the increased damage potential from these enemies, definitely adds to the difficulty. And it's one of those games, like with Hollow Knight, that the overall difficulty is going to be really relative to your own skill. One of the bosses that caused a lot of people trouble, I think I beat them in just about 3 tries. The only boss I think took me the longest to kill was the true ultimate final fight, but we'll talk about that when we get to the spoiler section. It is a game that is designed to test and raise your skills. If you are someone who completed the Path of Pain in the White Palace and Hollow Knight, then you should be more than accustomed to the platforming, even the more challenging and optional platforming challenges in the game. If you're again someone who did not, or this is your first kind of exposure to Hollow Knight, then you're going to be in for a very rude awakening. All in all, before we get to the spoiler section, I ultimately end up enjoying Silksong. Now, as per the original question in the Stinger, is this better or worse than Hollow Knight? And I think the question is, how does this compare to launch Hollow Knight versus Complete Edition Hollow Knight? If we compare 1.0 to 1.0, I would say Silksong is definitely better. There are, at the base level, a bit more quality of life features. There's definitely more ways of getting around. The different tools and the variety of tools allows you to better customize your strategies, and I can already start to see how people will have different play styles and fight strategies for some of the more advanced battles. Now, if we're talking about old content or Complete Edition Hollow Knight, I feel that Silksong is a bit lacking in terms of quality of life features. There are, once again, you'll get access to fast travel and you'll be able to buy the different maps in each area. But I think I would have liked a few more fast travels. There are some areas that it is a very long run back to a specific fight or specific arena. The ability to set up your own custom fast travel that was introduced in DLC and Hollow Knight does not exist in this one. you will get access to a somewhat, I guess, quote-unquote, hidden fast travel if you play all the way through, but it definitely comes very far in the game, and it's not 100% reliable in most cases. Perhaps the biggest thing about Silksong is that health is more than likely going to be the most important thing to get you through a lot of these encounters. Because again, enemies by default will do 2 hits, some of the larger enemies can do 3 hits. That being able to upgrade your health is perhaps the most important point when it comes to the early and mid-game frustrations. Getting the damage ups do help, but I don't see them as important for boss fights since you're just going to be smacking them consistently anyway. But they're really meant for the minor enemies, which even the minor enemies have all received a bump in terms of their difficulty and challenge. Anyone who's, of course, gone through Hunter's Marsh for the first time can certainly attest to that one. But with all that said, what Silksong does exceptionally well is it presents its challenge again as a mountain for you to climb. It doesn't give you any tools, or very few tools for that mountain, but it leaves it up to you to uncover and just see how far you can go. But with that, it's time to get to the spoiler-filled section for this review. So, this is your warning. Skip ahead to the timestamp if you want my final thoughts sans spoiler, but we're going to get into it right now, so no use complaining or crying if I spoiled anything for you. And with that, let's get to the spoiler talk about Silksong, because there is certainly a lot to go over. One of the more interesting aspects of how the pacing of Silksong and Hollow Knight differ is that Silksong is designed around a 3-act structure. Technically, we could say Hollow Knight was designed around act structure, going from the beginning to getting to the city, to then defeating the different dreamers, and then of course going to the White Palace. But it was still kept very much open. You really had no idea where you were supposed to be going or what you should be doing at any given point. In Silksong, with the game being designed around this 3-act play, with the first act focusing on the wider worldly area, the second act focusing on the Citadel, and the third act being the kind of grand final test, it allows them to be a little bit more balanced or have a far stronger sense of place and escalation compared to Hollow Knight. The opening act will introduce you to all the major kind of biomes and areas of Silksong, and will be a relatively strong challenge. Now, of course, this is going to be gated by the final judge, or the last judge, who is the big boss unless you go another route to get to Act 2. Act 2, taking place predominantly in the Citadel, feels kind of like, I guess in a way, like a huge expansion of the city from Hollow Knight. It's all kind of kept relatively similar in terms of architecture and design, outside of the under area and the, the memorial, or whatever it was called. But you're going to be fighting very similar enemies, and they get a lot nastier at this point. And it's very interesting to see like how the bosses and the different areas act as these gateways to prove to the player, and of course prove to the developer, that you're ready for the next big test. And this is definitely capitalized by the role of double jump. In the first game, double jump was a major upgrade that kind of officially takes you into the middle of Hollow Knight. You can get it once you complete the, the Soul Catcher or the Soul Eater boss in the capital, and it's one of the first upgrades you should just rush to get because so many areas into the mid and back half require it. In Silksong, the entirety of Act 2 can be played and beaten without ever touching double jump. If you learn the tech behind your different moves, you can get through it, and you could even think that there was no double jump in the game. Double jump is actually hidden behind climbing the mountain, which acts as like this quasi-White Palace section that Silksong has, that if you want to ignore it, you can. Now, of course, if you choose to ignore double jump, it is not at all possible to get through the true ending. And in fact, the true ending requires you to complete all the major quests, all the kind of like story and bonus objectives, repair all the towns that are in the game, and this is kind of used as a way of allowing the developer to know exactly the kind of person and the exact skill level or base skill level that you're going to have leading into Act 3. Act 3 kind of acts as when the game, or in Hollow Knight, that the first era became corrupted, but this becomes the entire world, with enemies can now be randomly cursed into harder variants who do even more damage. And yes, the damage output will continue to plague you, even when you have all the health upgrades that one could ever have. But even with that, it is one of those games, as I said, because of how it's challenging the player to grow and adapt to the changes, that it really did start to feel easier as the game went on. One of the reasons why I chose, I think it was the Hunter Crest or the Wanderer Crest, the one that plays much like Hollow Knight, is that it has the fastest DPS. So what ended up happening is, oh no, the enemy hits me, I just start mashing attack and doing so much damage, I recover enough silk to heal myself. Or I just do so much damage that most enemies will die before they can even start their pattern, once of course I got enough attack upgrades. For the different bosses themselves, they all, again, follow through with having very different forms of challenging the player. So you'll have a boss like the Twin Clockwork Dancers, which is all about being able to keep track of what their attack pattern is and where they're going to be going. Then you have something like the final boss, and I mean the true final boss. And this one was a doozy. While it's not the same kind of battle as the final true boss in Hollow Knight, it kind of reminds me of fighting the God Challenge version of the Hollow Knight, the super advanced guy who I only managed to get to him one time and he destroyed me. This is a fight that requires a lot in terms of kind of rapidly adapting and being able to just understand the counter of all the enemy's moves. And it is going to be a very interesting battle when you get to it. I did manage to do this game's quote-unquote Path of Pain, even though I'm not sure if it's really considered it. And again, it goes with the enhanced jump tech. Silksong feels a little bit more trickier to move around compared to Hollow Knight. But a lot of that comes with a greater appreciation and adoption of combining the different movement tech. So here's the example. Your ability to throw out your pin or your needle that can be used to grab the various rings or to quickly close in on enemies. You can use this in the air to create a guaranteed air dash, as I said in the first part with how the base air dash has changed. So this will allow you to do something like normal air dash into a pin, into a double jump, and then try and make it to a platform. And there's a lot more like interesting combinations of the different movement tech. And if we do see them introduce a new, harder platforming challenge with DLC, I can begin to think about some of the obstacle designs they're going to design to make you use all of it. Another point that I think will be very polarized among fans are the number of traps and kind of trolls that Silksong has. Besides having just enemies show up when you least expect them, the game loves to throw sections that just feel like a way of, sticking it to the player when they least expect it, such as in Bile Water. And again, it gets at what I was saying a few minutes ago, that a lot of the challenge of Silksong is the player understanding what the game is asking of them at any given time. So by the time I got to Bile Water and started doing the optional stuff there, I already found the tool that cures you or prevents you from being cursed or getting like those maggots on you that prevents healing. Now, if I went another time, it would have been far more frustrating. And for myself, getting to some of the optional fights, because I kind of went in the complete opposite order of doing it, I already had all the health and major attack upgrades, so it was far easier to get through that. But again, it goes with this nature of Silksong that if something is going to be difficult, at least in the optional side, you may want to come back and do it another time. However, one thing that I do find that is very annoying is the use of the different kind of like beast shards or the kind of bone shards that you use to create your tools. Someone on social media compared this to the kind of blood vials and the bullets from Bloodborne, which was a system that I hated. And it has that same thing here, that it's really only there to actively punish a player who's already feeling the bite of losing. If you never die, you'll of course always be able to have enough shards in order to repair all your tools. I went with the kind of like drone. I combined that with the poison tool to have a floating homing poison bomb that does a lot of damage. And in a weird way, it reminds me of some of the frustration and difficulty that I saw with Armored Core 6. That it's a game that asks you, or I should say demands, that you learn what it expects out of you. So if you get that very quickly, you'll find a very fair, and in some cases very easy way of getting through it. And much like with Armored Core, like, as I said, like, Silksong was challenging, but it never got, like, hair-pulling, controller-throwing difficult for someone like me. But again, you're talking to someone who true ending Hollow Knight, so I knew what was coming. Now that the spoilers are out of the way, I guess a few more just, like, common points before we wrap up our review. I do feel like, with, like, the future of Silksong, and I'm sure we're going to get DLC, I would like to see a bit more quality of life features added. Besides either an easier way of getting some of the fast travel or coming back on some of the runbacks, it would be nice to have like a easier, I guess, like secret locator. Like maybe something that unlocks like further into the game to help the player out, because there are some secrets that I don't see how someone is finding them without resorting to a guide. And again, I'm not going to spoil that in this section. I'm really going to be interested to see how they're going to add or manipulate things with more content down the line. Whether we will be seeing more quality of life features across the board, more challenge, and also how this will factor into the tool system, because you're still going to be working with limited slots based on each press. So adding more tools while adding in more slots is going to be kind of counterproductive unless you make those new tools really, really powerful. But all in all, if you are someone who really enjoyed Hollow Knight, I mean got through all the way, then you are going to have a hell of a time, or hell of a fun time with Silksong. But if you are someone who has no idea what we're talking about, who has not pogo bounced off of a single bug in their life, then this does feel like a step too far. And even with Silksong being such a change or moving a lot of the rules around compared to the original Hollow Knight, it still feels like Hollow Knight is almost an essential play to really get into Silksong, because you need to at least be understanding the basic fundamentals, because this game does not give you anywhere near the same amount of leeway or time to start learning things before it kind of raises the heat. Quite literally, the second area in the game is the lava biome, with all the extra damage that comes with falling into it. So with that, Silksong was played with a retail key. If you are a lover or hater of Silksong or Hollow Knight, what did you think about it down below? Did you manage to beat the game? Did something make you throw a controller at a wall or inanimate object nearby? Let me know. If you let me tickle your game for a future stream, it does not have to involve Metroidvanias, Soulsvanias, or bugs. Be sure to get in touch. And with that, we'll be back with probably a shorter review coming real soon. Thanks for watching, and a special thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you enjoyed the video, do the YouTubing stuff, be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon, and you're interested in more in my thoughts on design, check out my game design books.